Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
I think if you cut John Henderson's arm off, it would probably say Grays and Hardy inside. He's worked in many roles within the brand. He talks passionately about a company that means so much to him. We also get to hear about some of those things that don't always go to plan and what fishing means to him and where perhaps he'd like to head as a dream destination. This is a fascinating look at somebody who is so deeply entrenched in the fly fishing industry but is still equally as passionate about it. I hope you enjoy this episode. John, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks, Pete, and it's a pleasure joining you. I'm very thankful to have the opportunity.
Well, it'll be lovely to talk fishing. It'll be lovely to talk fishing tackle with you as well. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But for our listeners, can you give me an idea of where you're based and perhaps where your home water is, the place that you spend most of your time fishing?
Yeah, certainly. I'm from a town called Alnwick, as we would say it from Alnwick. Most people would probably say Alnwick, as it would be spelt that way. It's in Northumberland, beautiful part of the world. 4 miles from the coast, about 4 miles from the hills. It's just a perfect location. My home river is the River Aln. It's a predominantly small wild brown trout river. Has a very, very small run of sea trout and salmon, but that's not what I would concentrate on in there. It would be really the brown trout that I would focus on, and that's where I kind of cut my tooth, if you like, and started the sport when at a young age of 8 years old.
So would you say, you sort of alluded to the trout, would trout always be your first love, despite the fact that I know you like fishing for salmon and everything else, but would you say it's trout that really have your heart?
I would say for any fisherman, when you have the experience for your first catch, your first fish, I think you're always going to kind of resonate back to that, right? And for me, it was the brown trout. It was a wild fish, only around about 9 inches, but believe me, when you're 8 years old, it's big enough that it made the heart pump. And I think it was just a great experience from using a natural fly, almost fooling the fish into taking that fly, feeling the line pull, and I think I'll always go back to that. Right, it's my first love, and it'll probably never change. Although there are so many other species that I've had the chance and been lucky enough to fish for since then, I probably would always say that if I had a choice, I would go back to a small river with a 7-8 foot rod and fish for wild brown trout for sure.
That sounds pretty perfect for me. Are you somebody that you said from those early ages that you were fishing on the river and those takes and everything else that went with that? Does that mean that fishing has been a constant? Because very often when anglers get into their sort of teenage years, their 20s, they sort of drift away for fishing. But for you, has it always been constant? Did it never leave you?
Yeah, it has always been constant. Since the day that I started fishing, it became a passion, and actually it grew, not weakened. And although I took on other sports in my teenage years, I became a golfer. I played football, other outdoor sports. I always fished, and I never stopped fishing. And I would suppose it was my teenage years where I started progressing into other styles of fishing, not just fly fishing, not just trout, but other species and styles. So I think for a lot of people where maybe they go into fishing, then drift away and then come back, it actually was a stronger connection for me as time went on.
And do you come from a family of fly anglers?
My father was. My father was the person who got me into the sport. But the rest of my family, I have 2 sisters and my mother, they didn't really fish that much at all, didn't really have much of an interest. So it was more of a father-son connection, if you like, from when I started fishing. That was definitely more our time.
Lovely, lovely. And so, would you say it was your father who was a major influence on your fishing career? Did he sort of take you to the river? And then was there a stage where you were sort of dragging him to the river to say, right, come on, let's go fishing?
Yeah, well, he definitely got me into it because I don't think I would have been allowed to go fishing at 8 years old on my own. But I think there was a certain trigger point where my passion overtook his. And although he fished all of his life, uh, my passion was definitely greater to be out there as much as I possibly could, every day, every night, whenever I got the chance. Now, often that would mean he wasn't able to join me because he was in full-time employment as a firefighter, so he would often be working shifts where he couldn't fish. So I would find a way to go fishing on my own, often biking down to the river with a rod strapped to the bike, with a vest on, and away I'd go. And I would enjoy that on my own, 2 or 3 hours on an evening, quite happily.
And do you think those days have changed in the sense of getting on your bike and going down to the river or going to a carp pond? Do you think those things still go on in quite the same way that they used to when you were younger?
Unfortunately, not. And I say unfortunately not because, as with most things, things change, times change, generations change. And it's that generational change that we've seen in the fishing industry that there are still a small minority of youngsters that love fishing, right? And I don't think we'll ever lose those. I think we'll always have a section of that young, really driven, passionate anglers. But what we've gained in that generation is technology, and technology definitely has given youngsters a reason not to go out. And you see all of the regular marketing about less Xbox, more tackle box, and so on. And we do as much as we can as a business to support that. And we've got initiatives in place right now with the Angling Trust, with certain key retailers that we try and support that. And we've invested a lot of money into that because I think it's really important, really, really important that we do our bit to try and change the minds of the youngsters that are on their Xbox. Because you can see it happening, right? You can see there's way more indoor activity than outdoor activity these days. And for me, I was always outdoors, always.
Yeah, absolutely. I bumped into some friends just recently, and I used the term going to knock for them when we were much, much younger. And that's a term probably that, you'd rock up in your bike and have a rod strapped to the bike somewhere and end up somewhere fishing. And I think that's a term that's probably been lost now. And we're going to come on to your work role as well, because it's a really fascinating story. But I'd love to get an idea of you as an angler as well. And how would you describe yourself as an angler for listeners?
That's a great question. How would I describe myself as an angler? I think really keen, passionate about the sport, which then lends itself to experimental styles of fishing, traveling places that I haven't traveled before, fishing for species that I haven't fished for before. Because there's an old adage saying in this sport that if it swims, I'll fish for it, and that is very much me. I'm not competitive in the sport. I'd much rather help and support and give people some advice that I've been lucky enough to learn over the years myself than try and beat the next person next to me. I've got a couple of very small examples of where I managed to beat certain people in the sport, which I'm sure we'll come on to a little bit later on, because he is a world champion. So I can't say that at one stage I beat a world champion, but it wasn't because I wanted to beat him. It was because I just beat him on the day. And for me, I think it was always about the passion for the sport, not the competition for the sport.
That's a really great answer, and I'm guessing I know exactly who that is, and I'm sure many of the listeners do too. So kudos for that as well, and that probably gives us an idea of your angling prowess as well. But are you the sort of person who likes to go fish with somebody, or do you prefer, our pastime's often called the solitary sport. Do you like to fish alone, or do you like a combination of both, or just like to go spend some time with a friend on the river?
I think if I was to choose 100%, I would probably want to be with someone. I think having company and conversation and the social aspect of the sport is one of the key elements for me. Albeit if I was to walk down the river and just have a couple of miles while I fish on my own, of course that's absolutely fine too. But I think it serves a purpose then, right? Because if you literally are on your own in that solitude, you tend to lose yourself and you tend to kind of relax and it helps heal the brain a little bit. But for the social aspect of it, I think that's always been the part that I've enjoyed most. Fishing with someone, sharing the experience, building the memories. It's always been kind of where the stories come from. Many of the fishing stories that people would have these days aren't when they're on their own. They would be with someone, and that's the part that I would say I enjoy the most.
Yeah, absolutely. Those moments are and can be incredibly special. Do you find you fish as well though when you're with somebody, as opposed to when you're actually fishing on your own?
No, that's actually a really good question and a very good point. That I think the concentration steps up when you're on your own, because you've got nothing else to concentrate on. So you really focus on the element of the fishing, whether that be presenting a fly or a lure or whatever it may be. I think you tend to be really focused on the job in hand. Whereas if you are with someone, the conversation probably stops that focus from happening, and you would tend to be more engaged in probably what you would call banter or conversation than focused on the actual element of the fishing, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it seems to me that your passion for fishing burns as brightly as it ever has. And as someone so deeply involved in fishing, do you have any hobbies or pastimes that allow you to step away from it? Because I guess on a day-to-day basis, you're consistently thinking about work, and that revolves, as we'll come on to, around fly fishing incredibly deeply. So is there anything that you do to step away from fly fishing to give you a breather?
Yes, as I said earlier on, I think being outdoors was always key for me, right? So I loved the outdoor sport, the physical world, and when I was young enough, I was able to play football. I loved playing football. But unfortunately, as you get older, it's not quite as easy. I still play a little bit of five-a-side football now, even at the young age of 43. So I still try and keep a little bit fit, but I still play golf. I've played a lot of tennis. But my main kind of switch hobby, if you like, that is a reprieve from fishing as an escape, but also still very connected, is actually shooting. I love, and I would say actually over the kind of the last 15 years, it's become my main hobby, because I just love it. I love the social aspect. I love the challenge. I really, really do love it. So I do a lot of driven shooting, a lot of pigeon shooting, and I also do a little bit of stalking locally for some roe deer, which I would say is quite connected to fishing in its style. It's the customer demographic, um, the people who do the sport is very connected to fishing. So I'm not kind of stepping away from it 100%, but it's enough of a way that gives me a chance to recharge for sure.
It's very important, isn't it? And for people listening, I'm sure they probably feel that working in their hobby or their pastime would be a dream. But sometimes there is a risk, isn't there? And I know I've experienced it, and I'm sure there's probably situations where you have, where you can almost be in danger of falling out of love with it, can't you?
It can be. It can be when you're so connected to it. It's quite a fine line, as you say. Luckily, I've never fallen out of love with it, but I have needed a break from it. I've needed to do something else, step away, more because of my career than my passion for the sport. Because clearly, when it's your job, and I'm sure you've heard that before, when you work in your hobby or when you love your job, it doesn't feel like you're working. Um, Believe me, that's not correct. it's hard work, and it doesn't matter where you are in your career or what path you choose. If you work to your best of ability and you're pushing yourself to the boundaries like I always done, then work is hard, and it shouldn't be easy, right? It's hard work, and that's where sometimes that hard work leads to, okay, now I just need to step away, do something different for a couple of days, and then come back recharged. Often that could just be one day on a weekend, or whatever, a vacation. It could be anything. But yes, hard work is tiring sometimes, and when you work in fishing tackle, that becomes tiring. So you have to have some form of repair mode, which for me is other hobbies, my family, my dogs. There's various different things.
Nice. And, you work with probably one of the most prestigious brands historically in fly fishing. But even putting that into context, the fishing and certainly the fly fishing world is a pretty small place to operate in as well, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and obviously you talk about the brand Hardy. I would be, I think, within reason to argue that it is the best brand in the world. We've been operational now for just over 150 years, always based here in Alnwick, Northumberland. We've just invested in growing the business further by building a brand new purpose-built facility for our manufacturing. We've just launched a brand new flagship store and museum. So the investment continues, and that legacy of the brand that's been built over by thousands of people still goes on today, and it's extremely important for me personally, the town, the business, that pride of being connected to such a brand maintains. And for me, it's all about pride. I'm extremely proud to be able to represent such a brand like Hardy, for sure, and all of the other brands that we have in our portfolio under Purefish.
Yeah, nicely put. So, we've let the cat out of the bag a little bit about who you work with, and I'm sure there's many people listening know exactly who you are anyway. But did you plan to work in fishing? Was that passion so strong that you thought there is an opportunity to do this? And I know it's an amazing story about how you started with the company and where you are now. But was there a moment where you thought, actually, I'd like to work in fishing?
Yes. I think for me, it was really clear, actually. Not many people would have two fishing tackle manufacturers based in a small town where you live and grow up. But I was one of those people that was lucky enough to have that. One being probably the most prestigious brand in the world of Hardy's, and back then it was called House of Hardy, or Gray's, and back then it was called Gray's of Alnwick. Now, both of these brands having a manufacturing facility and producing fishing tackle in the town that you grew up was, like I say, a bit of a rarity. And because of my passion for the sport, because I love doing it and exploring different types of fishing, and through school and my education, there was a thing back then, and I'm not even sure if it still exists, called work experience. And work experience was go out for a couple of weeks and go and experience work. It kind of does exactly what it says on the tin. So I took the decision to go and approach House of Hardy, and I knocked on the door, and the manager at the time, which was in 1995, this was, basically said, "Look, thank you very much for your intent. However, we don't have any of those positions available, so we're not able to give you any work experience." So I basically left there and went across to Grays of Annick. Now that might sound like Grays was my second option because you put the two brands next to each other, you can clearly see that Hardy was this really global, world-renowned brand, and Grays wasn't quite that at this stage, right? It was a UK-based, more UK-focused brand with a smaller product portfolio and a smaller reach. So that was why I chose Hardy to go with first. However, Grays were more than happy to have me come in and do some work experience. So that was kind of where it all kicked off. And at that point, you could say that my passion for the sport and ability to push myself to a really, I suppose, far limit, if you like, from a work perspective, gained me the opportunity to join the industry and start a career in 1996 that to be fair, I haven't looked back since.
And what did you start doing, John? What was the first role that you had at Grays?
Yeah, so I was a rod builder. So that would entail some really key elements to how and fly rods these were. Fly rod was put together. Now back then we used to use a Pomali reel seat with a metal reel fitting on the back, cork shives, and that would be the base of how a rod was built. Now, you would glue the shives onto the butt section of the rod, and back then they were mainly two-piece rods. You probably realise nowadays it's more like six-piece, never mind two, but back then, two-piece rods. The reel seat was glued on, aligned with what we called the spine of the blank. Then the cork shives were glued on, and that would give you this kind of constant shape of cork. Obviously, that's not a handle. That's not how a handle would look. So this is where the I would say the speciality came in. What happened next was there would be a lathe. The rod would go inside, and it would be turned by hand, completely by eye, completely by hand. Each handle was turned in a unique fashion, so nothing would ever 100% match because it was all done by an individual. So it would be a type of blade that was made from an original cutthroat razor. You would shape the handle either what we called a full wells or a reverse half wells, were the two handles that we would have shaped at the time, or a double-handed rod for salmon and double-handed rods. And that would all be done by hand. And that's what my first job was: shaping handles, building the butt section of the rods. And then from there, that would be passed on to the team of rod tyers, and then the rings would be tied on. And then from then it would be varnished and then finished and then inspected. And I did do other jobs through the next kind of period where I did a bit of everything that kind of gave me the full experience of how a whole rod was built, from tying rings on and also varnishing as well.
That's quite some difference from being a salesperson that hasn't necessarily always had that hands-on experience. You've actually been there, and it's fascinating what you say about the multi-piece rods now, because I think the first one that I really cast that I thought, yes, this works, was the Grays Missionary, funnily enough, that I thought was a great multi-piece rod. But also, You talked about the two businesses being, I'm guessing, relatively close to each other. And does that mean that Grays was set up by a previous Hardy employee and set up in the same place? Because, of course, Hardy then acquired Grays a little bit further down the line, didn't they?
Yes, it is. Malcolm Gray was the guy who invented the Grays brand, born and bred in Annick. So he had the legacy of founding the Grays brand, but various other, I'm going to call them ex-Hardy employees, then helped build that. I could name a small section, but Frank Proudfoot, who was a rod designer for Hardy. He came and supported Grays and helped build them from being this really new young brand into someone that had the experience and the knowledge of how to build rods, design rods. You had other people like Dougie Pringle and Jeff Thornbury who were blank rollers, so they used to work in the fiber tube section of Hardy, which was their composites division. And they came over, so there was this experience that kind of needed to be there to help build the brand from being this young, new kid on the block to then being respected of, okay, well, why would I buy a Grays rod instead of buying a Hardy or Sage or Loomis, whatever these brands were at the time on the marketplace? Because Grays was more about made in the UK, but also value for money, whereas Hardy was more made in the UK, best you can buy. And I think that was kind of the differentiation between the two brands. And to your point where Hardy came and bought Grays, I think what they saw in that was this real kind of joint balance between the two brands and how they would work. So that premium price point Hardy, that kind of middle price point value for money Grays can actually lend itself to each other really well. And that's ultimately where that relationship kind of started and then progressed over the years, because that's ultimately what we have today. We have that price, position, and architecture where we offer premium product in one and we offer a more value for money product in the other.
Yeah, it's an absolute dream, isn't it, that they complemented each other so well without stepping into their respective marketplaces. And it must have been a match made in heaven when that purchase actually went through. So looking at your career as well, you were building rods and, we're looking a number of years later. So how did your career path move from building the rods? Was there a twist or turn that led you to where you are today?
Yeah. A twist or a turn could be one way to describe it. I was asked by someone in the business at the time if I could help support at a consumer event. It's a show that used to be called the Go Fishing Show, and at the time it was at the NEC in Birmingham. Now this show was a big commercial show where consumers would come, they would try rods, and then they would ultimately buy them from a retail store. Now, the store that attended the show was called Chapman's, or at the time that was Chapman's Angling, based in Scunthorpe and Hull, but it was also Glasgow Angling Centre. So it's what you would know now as Glasgow Angling Centre. And the owner of that business called Paul Devlin. And when I attended the show, it was my first ever experience in really talking to consumers about fishing tackle. And I think what happened quite naturally, as a young, kind of energetic, passionate angler, that kind of shone through to the consumer. And for whatever reason, at that point, it was like a trigger. Someone pulled the trigger, and then this kind of relationship with consumers and customers started coming together, where my passion for the product then shone through. The show was extremely successful. I didn't really think anything of it at that point because I had a job to go back to on the Monday morning, went into the factory. And then maybe 2 or 3 weeks and months down the line, a position opened up in the sales function of Hardy, covering Scotland as a territory sales manager to sell product to trade B2B customers. And the customer that I worked for or helped and supported at the NEC show, based in Scotland, in Glasgow. And because the territory role was covering his account, he wanted, off his own back, to give some feedback on my involvement at the event at the NEC. That was actually taken on board very well by the management team at the time, and I was offered the position. Now, that was a big curveball because you've worked in manufacturing for 6 years, built an understanding of manufacturing process, and and best practice, to then be offered this sales role, which is traveling around in a car, visiting customers, having clear objectives. It's a very different world. And I think it took me about 30 minutes to decide that yes, I want the role. And I, to be fair, haven't looked back since.
Wonderful. And having a passion for something, especially when you're selling it, is really, really important. I think it probably helps sell the product. But I believe there are salesmen and then there are salesmen. Did you suddenly detect that when you were talking to these customers, actually, I'm not bad at doing this? And obviously the end result is them ordering something from you, so you know that you've done something well. But did you detect or feel that you had a flair or a talent for being able to sell product?
I suppose so, yes, and I don't want to sound too arrogant or big-headed, because that's not me as a person at all. I'm very humble in how I achieved this and where I came from. But ultimately, I think what sales became, and still is to this day, was all about relationships. And for me, I love dealing with people. I love talking to people. I love building relationships. And what sales was then, in 2002 and beyond to kind of 2009 when I did this role for 7 years, was having clear goals in your own development, what you wanted to achieve, represent the company and the brands that you're selling in a professional and honest way. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And that in itself builds trust with your customers. And then that trust becomes part and parcel of the DNA of how they operate. And to this day, I would say that in the fishing industry specifically, sales is built on relationships. And the most successful salespeople out there have great relationships with their customers. And I would like to think that I learned that very, very early on in my sales career, that has kind of passed on through to the present day.
Yeah. I was going to ask you the sort of question that I had Nick Yardley from Fulling Mill on, and he said they still like to shake hands and do the deal. And I'm suspecting you're very, very similar in that sense too.
Yeah, for sure. There's nothing better than having that sense of accomplishment and doing a deal, shaking hands, like you say. I think for me, it kind of transitioned away from doing the actual deal to more support and mentorship to the team at a certain stage. And now that's where kind of my focus is more about helping our people and helping our team to be more motivated and do that as well, and have that same passion towards doing the deal and writing it on the piece of paper and having that sense of accomplishment, because ultimately that's what everybody wants, right? The more we sell, the more we continue, and the more profitable the industry becomes. Not just us, but the industry as a whole.
Nicely put. So does that mean then, from that point of view, that that sales role looking after Scotland went incredibly well, and then you have grown that from there? And what's your current role within the company?
My current role right now, as we speak, is EMEA Operations Director. So EMEA for us is Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So we have, as part of the Pure Fishing Group, we may be stepping forward a little bit too much here, but Pure Fishing own and distribute 17 different brands, Hardy and Grays being two of them. But we have three main business units in the globe, one being North America, one being EMEA, and one being APAC, which is our Australia, Japanese, and Chinese business. So the EMEA business is kind of our European hub, if you like. We have offices in Denmark, in Breda, in Holland, and we have an office here in the UK, based in the Northeast. And we now service the EMEA region. So the EMEA Operations Director is responsible for all of our manufacturing. So our Hardy factory, also Abu Garcia. For those passionate anglers out there, they'll know the Abu Garcia brand, based in Svanksta in Sweden. We have distribution centres across Europe, in Poland, in Sweden, and in the UK. And also a really key element of how we support our customers is our customer service function, because that still remains really connected to our sales teams. So that's what I do today. And now that's quite new because up until more recently, I was the commercial director. So that would be sales and marketing for the UK and the Nordic region. So I looked after Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland, as well as Iceland bolted onto that, for all of our sales and trade marketing function. At the same time, I was still operating the UK Hardy manufacturing plant. So it was kind of like a hybrid role. So that kind of brings you up to speed with a few blocks missed out in between, from the territory sales manager right the way through to present day.
That's really, really impressive, and congratulations on what so far has been a fabulous career. In this time, though, have you noticed that the marketplace has changed regarding shops and doing business? Have you noticed the change, or does that approach, is it still the same, or does the internet in some way play a part in the transactioning of business?
Well, I think it would be naive to say that it hasn't changed from my perspective. Of course, it has. The world has kind of dictated that. Digital sales or digital activity has become forefront of a lot of people's minds, whether that be via a smartphone, a tablet, or a laptop. So everybody kind of has that digital touch point where they didn't really have that in the past. So yes, that has to be embraced. Yes, we have to tailor our business towards the digital world, whether that be how we market our products, how we talk about that to the consumers through content, being more social media driven, whether it be website banners and content that goes on customer websites. And I think the key that we shouldn't lose, and I've always been an advocate of this, although the industry has changed and has become more digital, and we will embrace that and we will continue to grow from being part of that, we also have a very, very important role for all our bricks and mortar stores. These stores have been around, some of them for hundreds of years, and I'd like to think they'll be there for 100 years more. And although sadly some of them have decided to close their doors or have gone out of business due to economic pressures, there are still a lot of them out there. We deal with between, I would say, 600 and 800 dealers in the UK alone. And that 600 to 800 number covers a spectrum that you wouldn't believe. You've got some shops that maybe have a little bit of everything. They might sell some general sports goods with some entry-level fishing tackle in there. There might be some general fishing tackle stores that only cover coarse fishing or carp fishing. But then you've got the big guys that continue to grow, like the Angling Directs, the Go Outdoors, the Glasgow Angling Centres. But then you've also got really specialist stores like the John Norris of Penrith, who have been around for a family business for a long, long time, and they really represent the fly fishing world. Farlow's in London, Gary Evans in Cardiff. These are just naming a few. You've got shops that have been around for a long, long time. And I think even though the world is more digital, and yes, more people might buy via online websites or Amazon or different platforms, we shouldn't forget that for a consumer to be able to walk over the thresh of a fishing tackle store and have that expert advice given to them is paramount to this industry. And it would be a real shame to lose that. So for me, we have to support that. We have to help that grow at the same time as parallel being more digitally focused of how we develop along with those trends changing, which will happen. I think, like I said, it would be naive to say it wouldn't, but it's the balance between not doing one over the other, but doing them both parallel to each other.
That's very, very nicely put. You've worked with some amazing people. Certainly, two I'd love to mention is Andy Murray and Howard Croston as well, who I guess you're alluding to when you were talking about your beating him on the day of fishing. I think he's probably one of the true greats of rod design. And it must have been amazing to be able to be around these people and others as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can honestly say, hand on heart, I've learned things from both of them. Howard, let's start with Howard. Howard is a unbelievably talented fisherman. Unbelievably talented, and you don't become world champion twice without having that talent. I said at the beginning of this that I wasn't a competitive angler, and that's because that's not me, right? I don't want to prepare a week's worth of practice to then go out and compete against others to try and catch as many fish or as heavy as a fish as I can. I want to just enjoy my fishing. So for me personally, that's not about me. But for him, he takes that and he excels at that like you've probably never seen before, because the guy is a machine. I'll never forget when he first joined the business and he relocated to Northumberland. There's two little stories about Howard. One is, of course, going to come onto that in a second when I did beat him, but I'll come onto that. The other is my local river, my small local river, Allen. I had the opportunity as a guest ticket to take him along, and I introduced him to a few of the small little pools. And bear in mind, this river is no wider than 30 feet, 40 feet in places. Not a very big river. So I've gone to one of my favourite little pools, and I've kind of approached it how I would approach it as a casual river angler. And I've had about 6 fish, 7 fish. Quite proud of myself. One was in there about 10 inches. I'm liking this. It's good. Howard's watching me in the background, and he said, "You finished?" I said, "Yeah, I think I'm finished. I've kind of exhausted this pool." He went, "Okay, great. Well, you come out and I'll have a go." And then he takes out of his backpack of his vest 2 knee pads, like what you would see a carpet fitter put on. And he puts these knee pads on his knees, and he goes in the very, very tail of the pool, way further downstream than I even attempted to be in. And bear in mind, this is a very small river and quite a small pool. And he goes down onto his knees and he starts approaching the pool. Well, to say that I think he had probably around about 30 fish in this pool kind of disheartened me a little bit, because I'm like, really? How were those fish even there? But that was an example of his skill set, his ability to read a pool and fish it in that competitive way that kind of pulls every single fish out of there that you could dream of. So yes, he is an exceptionally good angler. However, just before we finish on that point, because we need to just clarify this, when he first came over to Northumberland, we had a fishing club as part of the business, Hardy's Fishing Club. We used to go out on days and we used to do little trips around different trout fisheries. And this trout fishery was called Markle Fisheries up in near Edinburgh in Scotland. General put and take, small stillwater platform, like what you would imagine most trout fisheries to be. And it was a simple competition of 4 fish. You catch your 4 fish, you weigh your 4 fish, and the heaviest bag wins. It's not about catching 25 fish or 30 fish. It was about the 4 fish. Well, of course, Howard caught the most, but that wasn't the competition on the day. And I'm very pleased to say that I took the honours of that competition by around about 6 ounces off Howard. And I still to this day remember that I was the champion of Markle Fisheries, not Howard Croston.
I'd hang on to that one as well. And also, I've not been lucky enough to fish with Howard, but at shows, I always used to go up on the casting thing and have a cast, and he'd often come up, and there was Fernie, myself, and some other people. And he's also probably, I think, he and Jim Fern are probably 2 of the people I most enjoy watching fly cast as well. That they're just so beautiful and effortless. Technically, Howard, technically correct. And he's got that as well as being an awesome angler as well. So I think he's got everything covered, hasn't he?
Yeah, but we need to stop talking about Howard now.
And Andy Murray as well definitely needs a shout, doesn't he?
Well, actually, yes. Andy is an exceptional salmon angler, and Andy being the product designer before Howard and I were born. To be honest, he developed some of the most iconic rod ranges and supported with reel ranges in the Hardy brand for many years. And when I joined the business in 2000, he was really supportive, very helpful, and I built a kind of friendship with Andy at that time, where he was open, he was honest, and he shared things that helped people develop. And he was a great ambassador for the sport. And then, of course, Andy left the business to pastures new and to progress with other brands, and then other roles as a gillie on the River Tweed, where I was lucky enough to fish with him and join him, and he kind of introduced me to double-handed salmon fishing. And I caught my first Atlantic salmon, about 10 pounds, covered in sea lice, in a pool called the Pot on Tweed Mill, from a boat. Andy was rowing the boat, and I covered a fish and hooked and landed this fish. And it was the moment that kind of stuck with me from a salmon fishing perspective, because once you've had that feeling of an Atlantic salmon pull line off your reel, I don't think you'll probably ever experience anything like it in any other type of fishing. And for me, it was a immediate love. And I've been lucky enough now to progress and fish on many other rivers around the world, not just Scotland. But Andy has been a huge mentor in achieving that, from his casting, from his ability to read a pool, as well as Ian Gordon, because Ian Gordon was another person who helped kind of develop my casting style, if you like. And the way that I like to describe my own casting style is a hybrid between Andy and Ian. Andy was this really traditional spearcaster, and his technique would be round the rim of a coffee cup. And when you lift your line off the water, you want to imagine the tip of the rod is going around the rim of a coffee cup. But Ian Gordon was way more modern in his spearcasting technique. So instead of having this traditional D loop, Ian had this V loop, and it came from speed, it came from style, but either of them were perfect to watch. And I kind of watched both of them and picked pieces from both of them, and I've developed my style to be kind of bang in the middle of them, which you could say is right or wrong either way, but I enjoy it, and it definitely gets the line out, so it's doing something right. But I've got a lot of people to thank. I've got the Andy Murray story doesn't kind of stop there. Unbelievably, been friends for years, worked together, stayed friends when he left the business, and then my mother's brother, my uncle Michael, decided to do a family tree, and he walked into my mother's house one day and said, "Do you know an Andy Murray?" And I said, "Yeah, he plays tennis." No, not that Andy Murray. Andy Murray and fishing. I went, "Oh, well, yeah, of course, I'm very good friends with him." And he went, "Well, you're also related." And that's probably too long a story for this, but we are genuinely related. And unbelievably, that just helped cement our friendship as family members, and the whole family now, from my kids, his kids, all stay in touch very regularly. We get together and catch up as much as we possibly can.
That's really, really nice to hear. And having a cast that's a hybrid of Andy Murray and Ian Gordon's a pretty impressive one to have. So I'd be very, very happy about that. But you know, this is more sort of modern time that we've been talking about, but it's absolutely extraordinary that Hardy have celebrated 150 years. That's quite some achievement, isn't it?
It is. And I think the key achievement to that is it's always been here in Alnwick. From the very day that the business was founded right through to present day, always in the town, always been here, and employed people locally, and delivered the best fishing tackle in the world. And I think we should all be proud of that. Anybody that's associated with the brand, the business, should all be proud that a brand like Hardy still going strong today, still invests in development, in innovation, but remains the heritage of what we make, from perfect reels that were the first reel ever made through to Cascapedias, Marquis, various different versions of reels that we've continued to make here in Anik, and we've got a brand new one coming out in September that I'm not going to give you the name of, but it's in past history the best-selling Hardy reel of all time, and we're reintroducing that reel to be launched in September, which I have no doubt will be a huge hit for all of the Hardy fans out there.
Well, thank you for that little scoop, and I'm sure people will be able to figure out what that is, and we look forward to seeing that. And it seems to me that, as ever, really, you've been doing really interesting things also with your rod ranges. And I've talked on here previously about how cool the ultralight LL range sounds as a river angler and what you were doing with those. And I've always felt, and I know we were talking a little bit off mic, and I've talked about it on the podcast previously as well, about how Howard had been slightly ahead of the curve in design. And I think about the grey Streamflex. That must make your job easier as well, that you've got great product that's being designed that you can let people know about, along with the reels that you just mentioned. So always, I guess, innovating as well in fly fishing tackle must make it a good role for you to hold.
And I think you have to, right? I think the day that you become stale and don't move with innovation is the day that someone else will. And I think it's that fine balance between keeping the heritage, the legacy of a brand like Hardy, but also develop the innovation that comes with it. And what you see now is you have a performance brand image and you have a heritage brand image. And they're two very different images, but they go perfectly together because you can actually mix and match them perfectly. You've got a Cascapedia reel that's made in Anik. It's a heritage design, but it can go on a very modern Sintrix double-handed rod and deliver the best balanced outfit you can buy. So that connection between the two works extremely well. You've got a Fortuna reel that has one of the best seal drag systems in the world that you can take out to Florida or the Seychelles or wherever you may go and catch the biggest GTs. And these reels stop them on a sixpence. So that design and innovation difference is really important to the business. And I notice you come back to Howard again, Peter. I think we've got a little thing for Howard here. I think we're going to have to be very careful that we we're not going to call this the Howard
bet.
Show, are we?
Absolutely. And you mentioned Sintrix there as well, because that was really an important innovation for you, wasn't it? That really, although, as you say, the brand had always been there, and you've used the word heritage, and rightly so, but that really catapulted the brand looking at the future ahead of the curve, ahead of other brands at that time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it did. And ironically, the story of Sintrix. So for those that don't understand, Sintrix is a proprietary mix between a nanosphere particle and a specific mix of carbon that, when put together, makes Sintrix. Now we have varying different grades of that. We can go 220, 330, 440, 550, and it gives you varying different benefits from strength to weight ratio. And what was done really well, and the way we describe that, is when Sintrix was first designed, it was almost like going from what fiberglass to carbon fiber was. So if you imagine Greenheart to cane, cane to fiberglass, fiberglass to carbon fiber, this next step between carbon fiber and Sintrix was our real exploration into innovation. And the Zenith rod range, which was the first to house the Sintrix material, became one of our best-selling rod ranges of all time. But no one called it Zenith. Now, if ever there was a very good story about how marketing works, everybody called it Sintrix. So when they walked into a shop, they asked for the Cintrix rod. When they went to a show, they asked to cast the Cintrix rod. And often we as a business would have to say, do you mean Zenith? No, I mean the Cintrix. And they thought they knew more, that it was nothing to do with the name Zenith. It was actually called Cintrix. And now to this day, still people call the rods Cintrix, which when you think about it, we've had Zenith, we've had Zephyrus, we've had Ultralight, we've had Aiden, we've had Shadow, we've had various different rods, all with Cintrix technology, but everybody still calls it Cintrix.
It's sort of like the Hoover thing, I guess, in some respects, isn't it?
Yeah, I want a Dyson.
Yeah. Yeah. So you must get your hands on so much of the tackle. What is your Hall of Fame? What is your favourite piece of Hardy or Gray's tackle? I'll give you two pieces of tackle. Tell me what they are and why.
Oh, two pieces. Oh, that's very difficult. Well, I'll start with the reel. For me, personally, my favorite is the Cascapedia. And the reason I love the Cascapedia is because although it's a heritage-based design, it's got a really good, reliable disc drag system in it. So for a salmon angler, it balances the rod well. You've got huge line capacity, and you've also got a really reliable drag. So for me, the look, the feel, the design of a Cascapedia reel would be my go-to. Now, one thing, you might edit this out, and I'm sure you might, but one thing that is a really, really good metric of have you ever succeeded is how many people copy your product. Now, you might see various different brands out there bring product that look extremely similar, if not identical, to a Cascapedia reel, but they aren't a Cascapedia. And that's what I'll state that if someone feels that they need to copy the reel so much that it looks exactly the same, then you know you're doing something right. So our Cascapedia has become this image of varying different reels across the years and across various different brands, where it just goes to show how popular it is when other people, other brands haven't designed it from their own innovative design. They've taken it from the Cascapedia. So you might edit that out, but that's my take on when you know you've done something well, you know someone copies it. So the rod, I'm going to have to say not fixed to one. It would be whatever's relevant to today. Because as technology moves, rods are the forefront of that. Now, if I was using a rod from 3 years ago, I would find myself behind the time. But the reel doesn't work like that. So right now, I'm currently using an ultralight 13'6" 8.9. Phenomenal rod, paired with an 8.9 Cascapedia reel. Phenomenal outfit. If I'm fishing on a river, I'm using a 9'5" weight for somewhere like the Test or the Itchen, and I'm using a small lightweight reel, classic lightweight, and the rod will always kind of move with what we're developing now, and I think when we bring out another rod range, I would then say that I'm using that rod. I wouldn't stick to that one. So I probably haven't answered your question, but that's the way my thinking is.
There's some fascinating answers, and I won't be editing this out because we don't edit the podcast, so that's going to stay in. And I think that's cool. And I, in my tiny little world, if somebody's doing what we're doing, then you think it is pretty cool that you must be doing something right, and that is the highest form of flattery. It can be deeply irritating, and I'm sure it probably is more so for yourselves as well when that happens. So yes, and I actually have a Cascapedia on my a trout one for my bamboo rods as well. So, and they look damn cool as well. So a very, very good shout. Do you get to test stuff in interesting places?
I have had the chance to test stuff in interesting places, yes. I wouldn't say I get to test stuff in as interesting places as Mr. Croston does. Um, I know that you like talking about Howard, so we'll come back to Howard again. But Howard tends to need to test product, right? His job is reliant on what he tests and how those rods get put through their paces. So he will end up doing a lot of testing. It's fishing really, but he calls it testing. Now, back in when was it? 2013. I did a role in the business called a brand business manager, and that was part of product development. Now, in that period, I developed a rod range that needed testing. It needed fished with, but it needed testing.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough to go to Florida, and I was lucky enough to use the product in the Keys, and I caught lemon sharks on trout rods, 10-foot 7-weight trout rods. And I have to say it was a great experience because we put the rods through their paces like you would not be able to do anywhere else. And you know then at that point that rod's capable of anything. So I think product testing is always going to be part of new product innovation, new product development. But unfortunately, that's not my job anymore. So I don't really get a chance to do it nowadays. It would be mainly our product development team in the fly team, which would be Howard Croston and Alistair Dandy. Some call them Laurel and Hardy. We call them Howard and Alistair.
So does that mean you have a dream destination? I'll give you two. You can have a saltwater one and a freshwater one.
So from a saltwater one, I haven't experienced enough of the world to be able to say that I've tried fly fishing for GTs or bonefish or tarpon. So I haven't done that. I'd love to do that one day, but I haven't. So the only saltwater experience I'm going to say that I have done, which was unique, it was a great experience. Would I want to do it again? Probably not, because it was hard work. But I was lucky enough to go down to Port Elizabeth in South Africa, and I hooked a bronze whaler shark off the shore. It wasn't fly fishing. It was on a beach rod. But believe me, when you're stood in sand with I think it was probably around about 300 pounds in weight, with an angry bronze whaler shark, and you've got to try and get it onto the beach to unhook it. Which I do have a very good photograph of it, by the way, because we did manage to get it in after about 1.5 hours. But that's why I probably wouldn't want to do it again. 1.5 hours in 30 degrees heat was excruciating. Although I'm so glad I can say I've done it. In the future, I'd love to try somewhere that I can catch a GT on the fly. That would be fantastic. Tarpon, permit, bonefish. I'd love to do that, but I haven't had that chance yet. Freshwater for me, I'm going to say if the fish are there, which unfortunately is a different story and probably not for today, aren't in the numbers that they should be today, I would say Scotland. And I'm not going to give a river, but I'm just going to say Scotland. But because they're not there, my first choice would be Iceland. And that Iceland experience for me is so unique. It's a different style of fishing, but the fish numbers, the clarity of the water is just exceptional. And probably the most enjoyable freshwater experience I've ever had. So my number one choice based on today's world would be Iceland.
Great answer. Like those a lot. Now, tell me something. We always talk on these things, and I often say that social media leads us to believe that every day on the water is absolutely perfect and nothing goes wrong. We don't get stuck in a tree. We don't cock anything up. Have you had one of those days, one of those experiences where something went dramatically wrong for you that you can tell us about?
I've probably got a lot more than one example. And for anybody that says they've never had one of those days, they're probably lying. I wouldn't say I've got oh, in fact, I have. I've got a perfect example. Perfect. In what year was it? The River Tweed had a phenomenal run of fish. What year was it? It probably was about 2014, maybe 2013, 2014. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but let's just say there was one year when the fish numbers were exceptional. Now, back to Andy Murray, was gillying on Tweed Mill along with a guy called Dougie Tate. The two of them were running the beat. Very, very fly orientated water. And I was invited to come up for a morning, only from 9 o'clock till 1 o'clock, because the guy who invited me only had a guest rod for the morning because he didn't have his guest rod for the afternoon. But because I knew the fish were there, I said, absolutely, I will love to join you in the morning. Now, I turned up, as I always would, quite promptly, probably about 8 o'clock in the morning. You wouldn't tend to start fishing until 9 o'clock anyway, because it's quite traditional in that sense. Had a coffee with Andy and Doug, and the guy who invited us just wasn't there. He didn't turn up. So I was like, oh, this isn't good. Eventually, it got to about 10 to 9, and I'm getting itchy feet. I've got my rod set up. I've got my fly on. I can see fish running. I'm like, right, okay, we need to go out here. We need to go and fish. I've only got until 1 o'clock. And the two of them, Dougie and Andy, both said, yeah, come on, let's go. So the guy had what's called the cold. Now, the cold would be the big kind of neck of the River Tweed, where every single fish has to go through there, but because it's quite narrow, tends to be a very good fish catching spot. Now, just below there's a pool called the Stones. Lovely wade, very, very gradual, lovely flow, perfect fly water. And because the guy who invited me had the cold and the Stones, the gillies both said, look, you fish the Stones, leave the cold to him, because that'll be his baby. He wants to fish that bit. Yeah, no problem. I'm more than happy to fish the Stones. Now, I fished between 9 o'clock and 1 o'clock. I fished with singles. I fished with doubles. I fished with trebles. I fished with tubes. I fished with flies. I fished with every single option you could imagine. And I had a hold of 22 salmon that morning. 22 different fish where they were on. It wasn't just what people would call a pull. They were on. Now, I lost 18 of those 22 fish and I landed 4. And to this day, it still haunts me because I don't know what I did wrong. And after talking to Andy and Dougie, both of them said, look, they're running fish. They weren't really taking the fly the way you'd want them to take the fly. They were still going upstream. They weren't turning downstream and so on and so on. But that didn't really help the way I was feeling, that 18 fish in a morning disappeared. And that would be my example of where things didn't quite go to plan.
Yeah, that sounds quite a special day for a number of reasons. And like you say, it's one of those you're probably laying in bed the night after and playing it in your mind, and you're subconsciously sort of lifting into that take and everything else that goes with it. But yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing. Now, we have spoken, John, for well over an hour now, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. You know, we're talking that we often look at the history of fly fishing and how long it is, and we're extremely lucky that Hardy have been there and have been a constant in it, and it sounds as though that will continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. Thank you for talking with such candour, such honesty, such openness, and such pride as well about a company that you have had such a large part of being that success story. I'm sure you're incredibly proud to be a part of that. For listeners, everyone knows about Hardy, but if they need to, how can people find out about Hardy and Grays, and how can people connect with you as well?
Well, from the business perspective, we have websites for all of our brands, and that would be hardyfishing.co.uk, graysfishing.co.uk, And we have, like I said, we have 15 other brands. So that would be Shakespeare Fishing, that would be Penn Fishing, it would be Mitchell, Abu Garcia, Berkeley, all of those brands. So anybody can go through our websites, see all of our range of products. We have a customer service team here in the UK who are more than willing to answer questions or support anybody that needs it, whether that be advice or whether that be something that needs fixed. And those details will be on the website of how to get through to them. Me personally, I'm on social media. I have a Facebook account. I have an Instagram account. That's kind of where I draw the line. I think that's probably enough. But I think that kind of, and any business related queries can easily come through the website and will be directed to me. If anybody has any questions or if anybody has any needs, they can go through that customer service team and they'll be put through to my email address or my phone number. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody or answer any questions if anybody ever has any.
Fantastic. John, it's been wonderful to catch up. It's been wonderful to speak with you. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate the chance to come on and speak to you. And I look forward to the next one and many more to come, hopefully.
Thank you so much indeed. Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture podcast. Thank you so much for listening as always. And of course, as always, there'll be plenty more coming very, very soon. Thanks for listening.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.